We did nothing in 2008 Georgia, nothing in 2014. And while Putin's there, and even if Putin is removed at the moment, there is no potential chance of a moderate successor coming. My best hope is that someone who's looked like a complete idiot, like Medvedev so far, will see if he somehow manages to get to the top, which I very much doubt. I've just picked one of the names out there that people might know a little bit more, former president. If he has some sort of real authority, he may then see the benefit of negotiations and slowly passing off what Putin did as many mistakes, revealing the true death toll and managing to slowly change public opinion. Well, one thing I do want to mention before we go is education. Much as people hate Russia at the moment, look at what happened between the First and Second World Wars. You cannot punish an entire nation more than it should happen. And then you will just cause that rise of nationalism, resentment, hatred. We still never really resolved what happened in Serbia in terms of education. And most Serbs still think that NATO is a heinous, horrible conglomeration that unjustly bombed Belgrade, forgetting about Srebrenica and other massacres. It comes down to education in our own countries to try to make people aware of what is fake news, what isn't fake news, but also education for people in Russia at some future point and in everyone else who is sympathetic to Russia.
I suppose the only other positive from Ukraine's point of view in terms of what's happening in the east is that Russia is still racking up an enormous casualty rate.
Exactly. And I think that, along with the economic problems that they're storing up for themselves, they're trying to hide at the moment. Inflation is not quite out of control, but very uncomfortable for people. And with wages not rising as high, although there are certain amounts of wages rising because there's a shortage in personnel, it's almost like a Ponzi scheme. Sooner or later, it's going to collapse. We saw in Afghanistan when the Soviet Union withdrew, how quickly things can collapse and how a whole system that looked like it would be with us forever. I remember growing up in times of the Soviet Union, and suddenly, almost overnight, it had gone. And Putin and his cronies know that that is never far away, and they're trying this delicate balancing act. And the anger of mothers, the anger of the corpses coming home, much as they try to hide them, will be one of those main pressures to bear. And of course, you can't train new staffers easily, which is why they tend to try to keep their main fighting brigades out of real harm until it really comes to it, and just throw in a load of conscripts and poorly trained, fairly new recruits. I mean, they've used up pretty much all the criminals they could, the nice meat from the prisons that originally Prigozhin provided, and that Russia has been trying to do themselves since then. But yeah, it's all this little by little added to the sanctions that we as the West are imposing. If they are absolutely tightened up, because there've been far too many loopholes for so long, James, then that will bring further pressure to bear on society in Russia, which at the moment, is still not really affecting anyone in the major metropolises where the middle classes are, to a lesser extent Yekaterinburg, but particularly St. Petersburg and Moscow.
And that fear that Putin will have, he's always had it. He's always been paranoid to an extent, and you could argue with good reason about how quickly his power base could crumble. I mean, that probably explains why we've seen an increase in attacks on civilian infrastructure and civilian targets in Ukraine. Only yesterday there was a hit on Kherson. I think 6 people were tragically killed. That probably speaks again to Putin's concern about his own position.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think maybe it's desperation, but I think it's certainly a feeling of impunity. I think I wrote on my Twitter feed that they know they can get away with this. What's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that Biden says, okay, you can use those weapons, and the British are given permission, as I think they actually already have been. Whether Ukraine's used the Storm Shadow or the French Scalp, I'm not sure yet. I don't believe so, but it will happen. I believe that Britain has permission. But that's the worst that can happen. And what's that going to do? Yeah, it'll hit a couple of bases. They'll maybe lose a few more planes, but we can just strike, say we, from Russia's thinking, we can just strike terror. And that's what will change Ukrainian minds, that this has gone on too long. Nothing's improving. We're just losing people. My house was destroyed. My parents' house was destroyed. Let's just make peace. And that's exactly the attitude that Putin wants. And if we allow that to happen, you won't get peace. You'll get a temporary ceasefire. Russia will restock, rearm, and will repeat the mistakes that we've made under Putin's rule in Georgia 2008, when we thought we had a peace that would last. After they went in, they effectively annexed 2 pieces of land. And of course, Crimea 2014, when so little was done by the Obama and Biden government. And then subsequently since then, when Trump was in charge, and here as well, we were on the signatories to the Budapest Memorandum, and David Cameron now admits that was a mistake, unlike Obama. And it's just repeatedly as doing nothing when Russia attacks. And it wasn't just Kherson, there's Zaporizhia now every single day. There were more injuries there yesterday, more people suffering in Kharkiv again this morning, a hit in the city and hits in the regions as well, which caused more injuries. It's just ongoing. Every single day, we're seeing tower blocks being hit by Russia's glide bombs, aerial bombs, if you prefer. And there's just no military targets at all. It's just pure terror.
I want to come on to what more the West could be doing to support Ukraine in a moment, Tim, but just talking about what's happening in Kursk currently, obviously the kind of one of the objectives of it was to try and divert Russian troops away from the front line to the Kursk Oblast. Doesn't really appear to have happened in any mass scale so far. I've heard some people describe the Kursk incursion as a tactical victory, but no more. How do you read it?
I would say a partial tactical victory. There was a lot of pressure building on Syrsky, and he had to do something dramatic. That's the head of the Ukrainian armed forces. And he replaced a very popular figure in Zaluzhny. Syrsky is actually Russian by birth, so there was a lot of distrust there, which is a little unfair, but baggage comes with you when there's a war, I'm afraid, and there's a lot of distrust on all sides. I would say he's and his predecessors are partly responsible for what I said earlier about not having very good defensive lines, which should have been done. And even under his short tenure, could have at least made a start and had something to defend at this point. Still nothing in that regard. The shambles in Kharkiv when the invasion came from Russia, the secondary invasion in the north, in the near the Vovchansk, as probably most people are understanding now, and the little villages around there. So the counter-invasion, as I said, partial success because it did withdraw some troops. The speed of the advance of the Russian troops inside Donetsk in the east definitely slowed down a little. But it was more noticeable, I think, from Vovchansk and northern Kharkiv region, where there was definitely a slowing down from artillery, from attacks, assaults by Russia. And Ukraine did manage partial success, and they've got quite a lot of media coverage when they recovered the aggregate plant. They're one of the big factories, which was seen as a mini control quarter for Russia for a while. But even this morning in Vovchansk, I've learned that the front line is being pushed forward again by Russia and that Ukrainians are on the retreat again there. So we don't know what it would have been had the Kursk invasion not happened, counter-invasion. But even there as well, I think Ukraine is struggling to hold on to some of the gains. They were continuing to expand on one side, but lose territory on the other. I don't think there are any more gains going on now. And slowly by slowly, the Russians are regaining hamlets, villages, but there's still a significant amount of territory that is currently occupied by Ukraine. And of course, the other thing that has been mentioned by many is it's a bargaining chip, isn't it? And we are, sooner or later, the war will end one way or the other, and it will probably end with some sort of agreement, be it with Putin or his successor, how far the West is involved and whether any ground has to be conceded or not. And I really hope not, because that's rewarding terrorism and the breaching of all international rules. But having a small chunk of Russian land will certainly help Ukraine and show Russians that the war can actually reach them when they're sitting comfortably having their lattes in Moscow or St. Petersburg.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.